Dear Hannah, I've been doing a lot of running lately. It's an excellent way to stay in shape, obviously, but that's not really why I do it. Mostly, I just like the fresh air and the freedom, Gives me time to think. An hour or so with only my MP3 player and the pavement for company can really put those office blues and relationship issues in perspective. Like it all seems a whole world away, Not that it's an avoidance tactic either, but I really feel that this is time to myself, just thinking. Helps me deal with my problems in a more level-headed and effective way when the time comes. I highly recommend it to you. Just be careful, I guess. I don't quite know how to say this, but I'll try. A couple of weeks ago, you and I had this huge argument. Funny. I forgot what that argument was even about now. Like I said, the running takes your mind off things. So, I was stressed, needed to get out of the house, pound the pavement a little, take my mind off things. So, I decided upon one of my favorite routes. In a city like this, you pretty much gotta resign yourself to the urban scenery, but there's a nice little park not too far from where I live. You know that one. I'm sure I've been there at least once or twice, but that's not important. Ordinarily, I'd avoid the park after sundown. Just common sense, really. But I needed a little greenery to improve my mood. So, I decided I'd do a circuit around the outside of the park, close enough to be scenic without being too reckless. It was about 10:15, so while the streets weren't exactly deserted, you could go quite some time without passing another pedestrian or even seeing a car on the road. I was glad for that, though usually my mind can only wander freely if I'm completely in a world of my own, and solitude always helps that. I was glad at first, anyways, as I saw the dark outlines of the trees that lined the park come into view. I became dimly aware of a weird, creeping sense of unease. I was unable to drown out this irrational feeling with music even, because it was around this point my iPod began to malfunction. As I got nearer to the park, the reassuring sounds of White Stripes' Seven Nation Army, a classic motivation song, if a little overplayed, were steadily overtaken by this weird sort of static, unlike anything I've heard before. It almost sounded like a quiet but persistent cacophony of voices speaking or laughing, but mingled together so as to create a single unintelligible sound. So, I made a note that I had one more thing to deal with tomorrow. Creepy, as the sound had been a broken iPod, made me all the more determined to calm my frustration with a nice long run. Still, I was starting to wish that there had been a few more people around, or that it was a little lighter outside. Would have been even better, even if the moon were hidden behind a dark, foreboding cloak of cloud. But I pushed on. What's the worst that can happen, right? Well, I'll tell you. As I began my circuit around the house of the park, 3-foot metal fence, the large central field came into view through a break in the tree line. In the day, the field would be occupied predominantly by people playing sports, like football, frisbee, and running like myself or whatever. Obviously, that was not the case at night, but neither was the field empty. A muffled cry drew my attention to the figure. No, 2 figures near the center of the field. One this holding the other as though in an embrace. In fact, at first it seemed that they were kissing, or possibly the larger one was nuzzling the smaller's neck. Seemed an odd time and place for romance, but I kept on running. It's none of my business. On the field, the larger figure suddenly jerked its head up away from the kiss. I don't know. I was becoming less sure. It released the second figure, who seemed to be falling to the ground, but the view was obscured by trees as I ran. But this time, I felt no need to stop and watch. The scene had increased my sense of unease, but I was still able to convince myself that it was just a couple of weirdos macking in the park. But as the trees thinned, my illusions were swiftly shattered. The second figure was indeed lying on the ground now, and the second was crouched over it. This stopped me in my tracks, though. It was difficult to see in the dark, and I still wasn't totally convinced that I wasn't accidentally peeping on someone's weird outdoor sexcapade. But then, that moon that I had been wishing for earlier came out. Suddenly, the scene, bathed in the stark white light of the almost full moon, was given a sudden disturbing clarity. While the distance still made details a little more difficult to make out, I could see clearly enough that the victim's much more obvious now, body and limbs were jerking about violently as the hulking figure crouched over it, ripping and tearing, feeling. The moonlight must have illuminated me too, because that thing in the field stopped and suddenly looked directly at me. I wasted only a second of standing there, panic struck, but that second will haunt me for as long as I live. There's two eyes, which I couldn't possibly have seen from where I was, even if they were glowing. It seemed impossible, but they just burned into me. I could feel it looking at me. No, it wasn't just that. I could feel it smiling at me. Huge, jagged, uneven teeth, crammed hazardly into maw, still bloody and red from its latest meal. It smiled. I knew that much. I didn't see it. I sure as fuck didn't imagine it. I just knew. Then I ran. The road I had been on parallel to the park. There was a few turnings along its length, so I knew I had a long way to go before I'd actually be putting distance between myself and that thing. I chanced a couple of glances at the field as I raced down the middle of the deserted road, moving faster and faster than I'd ever thought possible, even as an experienced runner, but there was the victim, left sprawled carelessly on the grass. No sign of that thing. I just looked back to where I was headed, and there was the fucker, perched mockingly on the streetlight right in my way. How was it so fast? This was my first good look at the thing. Blood was dripping from the wicked claws at the end of the arms that hung disproportionately long past the light on which it squatted. The mouth, still grinning, was exactly how I'd seen it in my mind, and yet, somehow, it was even worse. It covered a large amount of the creature's face, more than seemed biologically possible. Those eyes, they glue with a faint red intensity. Overall, the thing put me in mind of some kind of giant emaciated monkey or deformed hairy man. I was trapped there. There was no way to outrun this thing. I wasn't even sure I could start running. Up so close, the thing's gaze was hypnotic. My limbs felt heavy. My eyes began to burn. I just wanted it to be over. Slowly, got to me. A dim, rushing sound filled my ears. Suddenly, the thing hopped nimbly from the light into a nearby tree, disappearing from sight. It was gone, but I felt heady. It was as though I had been marked in some unknowable way. My eyes still burned. The area around me seemed to grow lighter, as though illuminated by a pale light. The rushing sound only grew louder. Then it hit me. The car, I mean. Don't worry. No major damage, apparently the driver had seen me in time to slam on the brakes, so just bruising mostly. When I awoke in a hospital bed, the doctors told me that I was a lucky man, but I'll admit it, I didn't feel so lucky when I saw that flash of red eyes and the yellow teeth through my hospital's third floor window. Anyways, I wrote this letter to you to explain why I wasn't at the hospital when you came in to see me, and why you haven't seen me at all since. Well, I've been doing a lot of running lately. Pray for me. Love, John.